James Brown, funky president. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Juan?
Well, with the election less than 2 weeks away, Republican John McCain is intensifying efforts in Pennsylvania, a state no Republican has won since 1988. Many political analysts say that capturing Pennsylvania's 21 electoral votes is key for McCain to win the White House. While the Pennsylvania race is being closely watched across the country, concern is growing that the vote will be marred by long lines at voting sites and problems with electronic voting machines. The state has seen a record number of new voter registrations. On Thursday, a group of voter and civil rights groups sued the state to demand emergency paper ballots be distributed when 50% or more electronic voting machines become inoperable at any polling site in the state.
The lawsuit was filed after Pennsylvania's Secretary of State ordered counties to provide emergency paper ballots only if every electronic voting machine breaks down at a voting site. The plaintiffs include the NAACP, the Public Interest Law Center of Philadelphia, and Voter Action. We're joined in our Firehouse studio by John Bonifaz. He's the legal director for Voter Action and founder of the National Voting Rights Institute. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you with us. John, explain the lawsuit further.
This lawsuit is all about making sure that people are protected when they show up at the polls on Election Day in Pennsylvania. The fact of the matter is that these electronic voting machines have a long record of breaking down, not functioning on Election Day, apart from the issues around whether or not they can be counted as being accurately counting votes. But in this instance, we're dealing with a situation of long lines with high voter turnout. Combined with that, we see a potential perfect storm impacting the right to vote. When machines break down, they cause these long lines that turn people away. One of our clients, Angel Coleman, is a single mother. She's a grad student. She has a full-time job. She showed up at the polls on Election Day during the primary in April. We were monitoring a national election protection hotline at the time, 866-MY-VOTE-1. And she found that the line was very long. She could not stay in line. She had to get on to work. She was told that 2 of the 3 machines were down, and there was no indication of when they were going to be back up. She had to make childcare arrangements later that evening to show back up and vote. The bottom line here, Amy, is that people should not be forced to wait hours in line in order to cast their vote, and they should not be forced to go home and come back later. The right to vote is too important, too fundamental to require that.
Well, you mentioned Pennsylvania. I lived in Philadelphia for many years, and I distinctly remember back in 1978 when there weren't the electronic machines, there were the old Jamestown lever machines, and Philadelphia was infamous for breakdowns. And in '78, when Rizzo was trying to change the charter to run for mayor for a 3rd term, all the machines in the black community were breaking down, and there was almost a riot on election day when the black radio stations called black people out into the streets to protest the fact that the polls were closing and thousands of people had not voted. They forced the Election Commission to leave the polls open several hours later for everybody to vote. But that was a near riot situation. That was 30 years ago.
Right. Well, I think what we've come from that point to today is we've found that now we have these fancy computerized voting machines, 24 states using them, 45% of the electorate voting on them, in response to the debacle in Florida 2000 with the hanging Chad fiasco. And we took a disaster of an election in Florida and we made it exponentially worse. And these machines are unreliable, they're insecure. California has decertified these voting systems, recertified them for only limited use. Florida and Iowa have shifted away from there, so has New Mexico as a result of a Voter Action lawsuit. But states like Pennsylvania and Ohio still have them in place. And the solution here has to be, aside from scrapping them all together and going to optically scanned paper ballot systems, is that in these counties, and there are 54 of the 67 that are using these electronic voting machines, we have to have emergency paper ballots on hand to be provided to voters when long lines develop because of voting machine breakdowns.
Talk about vote flipping concerns. We're already seeing, millions of people are voting right now in early voting. Explain what vote flipping is and where is this happening?
Well, we're monitoring 2 separate hotlines through Info Voter Technologies, which has data streamed from MyVote1, 866-MyVote1, and from a hotline promoted by CNN, 877 Go Vote C08. And Go CNN 08, rather. These hotlines are showing that there are vote flipping concerns already developing in states like West Virginia, Tennessee, in Texas, where people are showing up for early voting and finding that when they go to the process of voting for President of the United States, they're punching the screen for Barack Obama and it's flipping to John McCain. Now, these reports are not unusual, unfortunately. They are reports that we heard in Ohio in 2004. They are reports we heard in Sarasota County, Florida in 2006 in a hotly contested congressional race in which 18,000 missing votes occurred with a margin of victory of less than 400 votes between the two candidates. But what they do show, frankly, is that these machines cannot be trusted for accurately counting and recording our votes.
Are there any reports coming in of people who are voting for McCain and it's flipping to Obama?
Not that we've seen yet, but you know, this is a concern across the board. I mean, we're a nonpartisan organization, and we believe that the right to vote must be protected for everyone. But certainly, the fact is that when voters show up at the polls and are trying to cast their ballot and they cannot trust whether their votes are going to be properly counted, that's a fundamental democracy concern.
Can you talk about privatized voter registration databases?
Well, what we see here is an outsourcing to private companies of key election functions, which not only includes the vote counting process of electronic voting machines, but also electronic poll books and privatized voter registration databases. We saw in New Mexico, for example, in the Democratic caucus in February, 17,000 voters showing up and having to cast provisional ballots because the private company Election Systems and Software, one of the big four
ESS.
election industry companies, ES&S, had created and maintained a flawed database. This is what happens when we lose public control and public accountability of the political process, and when we essentially outsource to private companies these key election functions.
And in terms of what voters can do to assure that their vote is protected on Election Day, what are your recommendations?
Well, first, we think people should demand emergency paper ballots if they're in these jurisdictions where electronic voting machines are being used. They should say they want that paper ballot option and they want that emergency paper ballot, because that ballot enables one to conduct a recount or an audit. It is impossible, unfortunately, to conduct any kind of meaningful recount or audit using electronic voting machines. But a paper ballot system, you have the voter intent reflected on that paper ballot even after it's been scanned through an optical scan machine. We also think...
But you're not saying that they should demand a paper ballot instead of voting, right? In case the machine is broken, you're saying? Or?
Well, we believe, I mean, in the first instance, people should demand a paper ballot even if the machine's not broken.
Okay.
And now the lawsuit we filed demands that there be at least after 50% of the machines, 50% or more of the machines go down, the paper ballot should be distributed. But, you know, in Ohio, they give a paper ballot option. People should exercise that option up to 25.
Do those votes get counted?
They do get counted, and in fact, in many instances, they're better to be casting the ballot on the paper, far better, than to be voting on the electronic voting machine, where you have no idea whether or not it's going to be properly counted. But yes, of course they're going to get counted, and voters should exercise those options where they have them. Counties in Colorado are going to be providing that option for some in certain counties, and they should exercise that.
How can you practice voting? That may sound odd, but we are seeing the largest number of new voters, I think, in history registered. These machines are not easy or obvious.
No, they're not. And in fact, many poll workers, unfortunately, don't even know how to work them and what to do when they break down. I mean, the other whole piece of this is when a machine breaks down, you know, arguably the machine should be taken out of commission, not waiting for a technician for hours and to come and then somehow fix it when you don't even know whether it's actually been fixed. But, you know, beyond that, there's this basic point that citizens need to be engaged in overseeing the political process, in being vigilant about protecting the right to vote. That's why we're engaged with a national group of partners with us in monitoring this election, Watch the Vote 2008. And we really believe that citizen oversight is one of the true antidotes to encouraging and protecting the process. Well, it means that citizens are engaged at the local level, that they're monitoring their polling site, that they're showing up when there are problems, that they're responding to issues that they hear from either hotlines or from the local community, and that they're demanding of their election officials greater oversight. Most of these states do not audit the process, and yet we audit our financial transactions, we audit other things of value, we audit the most important thing of value, which is our vote.